I always feel that to be a great VC, especially a global VC, one cannot just be an economist or just be a asset manager. There's an element of being a sociologist.
At Context Ventures, our Advancing VC podcast covers all things startup and venture capital, but primarily how venture capital is changing from the emerging manager perspective. We'll be talking with venture capitalists, limited partners, and founders who are actively working at the frontiers of our industry and are advancing venture capital. Today, our guest is Hans Tung, a managing partner at Notable Capital with a background in investing in global startups. Hans has been on the Forbes Midas List for 12 consecutive years, including 5 years in the top 10. I'm also joined by a great friend, a frequent collaborator, and very close friend of the firm, Neil Devaney of Necessary Ventures. Hans, can you please share your journey to becoming a venture capitalist, as you've had quite a journey from Merrill Lynch to starting companies to working at Bessemer to Qiming to now?
Sure, be happy to. First of all, thank you for having me on this podcast. Really enjoyed meeting you over the years. I was born in Taiwan, came to the US when I was 13, and started off in LA, Los Angeles. Was very fortunate for college, was able to come to the Bay Area, to Silicon Valley, and I studied at Stanford. And that timing was very fortuitous. It was 89 to 93. So coming out of Stanford after college, it's very easy to work in consulting or investment banking. And I chose the path of investment banking and started my career, like you said, with Merrill Lynch in M&A in New York. Did that for 2 years. And even back then, 93, 95, you see the sort of howling out of manufacturing in America. I was on the sell side assignments for two companies. One was a fireplace manufacturer out of Vermont. The second one was a home bathroom accessory manufacturer out of Missouri, of all places. And both of them were facing tough competition from manufacturing in Taiwan and South Korea. It wasn't even China at that point in time. It was the second tier of the Asian tigers. For my third year, I came out to Hong Kong, and it was 95, 96, and I visited both Hsinchu Science Park and saw TSMC up front and close, and see all the semiconductor fabs that are getting built in Taiwan. I think it was TSMC had maybe 2 fabs back at that point in time in 1995. Who would know that 30 years later, they become such an important part of the global tech ecosystem. I also went to China for the very first time in 95. Went through Shenzhen. It was extremely backward. And it seems like this country would take a long time to modernize. And this is way before WTO. And China, ever since, start to change rapidly year after year. And the work ethic I saw in Asia when I was there is just incredible. People talk about 996, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. We saw that kind of work ethic as early as 95, 96.
Can you talk a little bit what 996 means?
996 means 9 a.m. to work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. So 12 times 6, you work 72 hours. Not as bad as banking. Banking is harder. I remember when I was working at banking, we're pulling 80 to 100 hours a week. So it's not just the Asians are hardworking. A lot of people are hardworking. But even then, in manufacturing, in semiconductors, you see this hectic work schedule. If something goes wrong, a PhD graduate from Stanford who works at TSMC will go into the fab on Sunday night to go fix what's wrong with what's on the manufacturing line. So the kind of dynamism that we saw in Asia was very evident even as early as 95. After Merrill, I joined private equity. So this is the first time I touched VC, but it's more later stage. These are many of them are growth companies in the semiconductor related space. So the first time I was in private equity, I worked there for 3 years in Taiwan and Singapore, and started seeing how Asia feeds into the U.S. tech ecosystem. Some of the investments I make are ODMs or contract manufacturers who manufacture for big brands out of the U.S., like a Dell, like a Apple, and they do components extremely well. They don't know how to build their brand yet, but they're a very good supplier to the brands in the U.S. So the ecosystem was already forming, even without China, between Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and U.S. very closely as early as the 90s. And it did that for 3 years. And then in 1999, the first internet bubble was just too hard to ignore. And everyone was on the desktop internet. Even though a lot of dial-up was a narrowband, not even broadband yet, I decided I should learn to be a founder. And then I co-started 2 companies. From 99 to 2002, that were in the internet space, and did that for those years. Sold both businesses, did not make any money, but learned a lot. Came back to the U.S. and then eventually joined Bessemer in 2005, early 2005, to be a VC. And this is now have been working for 9 years already. So I did investment banking. I did kind of tech growth equity investments. I also did 2 startups. So I felt that I was ready to become a VC and learn how to be a very good VC.
Fascinating. Those 2 startups, were they US-based or Asia-based?
Both were US linked. First one was US based, and I was general manager for Southeast Asia. VCs that invested include Greylock and HQ Asia. The second startup I joined was Hong Kong based. The technology partner was from Silicon Valley. And the VCs who invest in that startup were more corporate VCs. They were strategic players, conglomerates out of Hong Kong, with a lot of ties to British UK, because back then Hong Kong was part of the UK as a colony.
What are some of the things that you learned from those experiences? I find a lot of venture investors who had founding experiences draw on those time and time again in their investment career. Are there things that you still look at as learned lessons from those experiences?
During those 2 startups, I was managing somewhere between 5 to 60 people during different points of growth period. And when you have that responsibility, not just yourself, but the livelihood of 60 people and their families, you think a lot harder, and you feel a lot more pressure than just being a investment banking analyst or associate at a VC firm or a Wall Street firm. So the pressure and the responsibility is quite different. Then secondly, you don't have a lot of data points to make decisions. You had to learn how to make decisions on the fly and then develop that judgment. Did I make the right decision? Did I focus on the right product? Did I focus on the right customer segment? Did I approach the right specific target? Am I converting enough targets into paying customers? Am I spending enough time or too much time or too little time on the right customers? So all that go-to-market motion is something that sense of awareness is something that developed while working there. And then lastly, just being in the management presentation to the board from time to time, presenting what's happening in Southeast Asia as part of bigger operation. You learn how to deal with the board and answer the field questions from VCs who are among the smartest in the world. That help to train ability to figure out what are the issues that really matter, that people need to understand, and also be able to give you input, how to seek advice and get help as needed. So these are all things that I picked up as a co-founder of 2 startups, and it helped to train me to be a better VC and understand what the founding teams are going through as well.
Yeah.
From 2000 to 2016, it felt like the globalization of venture capital. As I understand, Sequoia set up regional global outposts. DFJ did. It feels like Bessemer did. And so is that how you went from startup founder into Bessemer?
Yeah. Famously in 2004, Silicon Valley organized a trip for the top 25 San-Hero VCs to visit Asia. And China was a key place that people went. And out of that trip, several of them started setting operation or tie up a local fund in China. So that was the era of sort of global expansion, and China was fast becoming the second largest IT market and consumer market in the world for internet services. So that was a time that everyone thought by working together, and the Clinton administration was very big on engagement. If you engage China, then you feel that China will become more like us, more like Americans in terms of economy and the way to do business and so forth. And I have to say, in the tech world, in the VC world, it's probably the most Americanized. There's a lot of meritocracy. In China or Asia, a lot is based on guanxi or relationships. But in tech, a lot is based on merit. If you build a superior product, you build a product more quickly than others. You can do that at more cheaper cost than others. The performance of the product determine whether you can win big or not. So for someone who's not from China, who's almost like a foreigner in China, even though I speak Mandarin fluently, but it was a different accent. It is just interesting to see how it's possible to come from nowhere and end up building companies that endure. And some of the startups I invested there, like a Xiaomi, like a Meituan Dianping, or later on at GGV, like Xiaohongshu, were all founders who didn't have any prior backgrounds. They were not anybody's son, or they didn't have any special ties to the government. They were all just coming from sometimes middle of nowhere, and it just went to the top schools based on merit, passed the college examinations, and built companies on their own that eventually become huge successes.
And then one of the firms, besides DFJ and Bessemer and Sequoia, that set up a China outpost was Ignition. Because I want to say Qiming was...
Qiming was Ignition's partner in China at the time. Yeah. GGV took a different approach. GGV set up its own operation, hired its own people, and Jixun and Jenny had done an amazing job for GGV by being hired in Asia, and then built up an amazing track record in their own right. But someone like a Sequoia is probably the most successful examples. Lightspeed built up their own operation as well. Mayfield teamed up with GSR initially. So both models can work, but it was a period of a lot of collaboration between 2000 and 2018.
And can you now talk about maybe this in venture, there seems to be a shift from a global approach to a more regional or national approach. Can you talk about that?
Sure, I'll be happy to. Back in 2013, after being on the ground in China for 8 years, I was starting seeing a different trend. One, more American companies were interested to go into China. I remember back then I co-hosted a reception for LinkedIn team led by Reid Hoffman going to China. And we talk about what was like, how tough it is competing in China, and what LinkedIn will need to do in order to have a chance of succeeding in China. The second trend I saw was that the Chinese consumer apps were fast becoming super apps. This is well before the term was coined in 2015 by Connie and Andreessen back then. Super apps were already emerging in 2011, 2010, and you see Tencent's WeChat becoming like everyday use. You see that Alibaba start putting more effort into the app world as well. And you see mobile payment start emerging with Alipay and WeChat Pay. These are things that nobody in the West has even seen. But being in China and seeing how this developed, you can imagine some of these apps will become global over time because they're just a superior product, and they build with a faster turnaround, and the functionality just very robust. And you can be living in any of the major cities, or even second tier, third tier cities in China, and not leave the home and have all the services be delivered to you, from food to grocery to everything, and done in a speed of within an hour. And so the matter of convenience and the sophistication, these apps being built were extremely impressive. So over time, you can imagine these apps can go beyond China. And also just a different regime that took over in 2013. It is different. The anti-corruption and campaigns like that start to have some kind of impact in how startups function. So I just thought it was the right time for my family and I to move back to the Bay Area, and also want to raise my family and my 2 kids in the U.S. as Americans. So we moved back in 2013, and I joined GGV and invest in a lot of companies here based in the Bay Area, and encourage them to learn from what I saw in China to become more fast-moving and to iterate product faster, to figure out how to build super app, and then for e-commerce company, how do you source from Asia more effectively, not just China, but also from India and Southeast Asia. In essence, become more global by applying best practices worldwide, and learn from everyone that does their thing best. So not just only the Silicon Valley way will work, but take the best from everywhere.
When did you first start to see the indication of like a return or reversion to more of like a internal focus, domestication, things like that? And do you think that's a longer term trend? Are we moving to a more isolationist world, or will we move back to a more globalist world still, and that's the longer term secular trend?
Yeah, I think what happened was in January 2018, I went to DC. I was invited to speak to comment on just global tech ecosystem. And you can tell DC's attitude towards big tech, towards the VC, towards China were changing rapidly. I think President Trump's visit to Beijing in the winter of 2017 did not go well. And if you read the book that came out of that from the National Security Advisor at that point in time, you can tell it's the beginning of a different era where geopolitical tension will play a bigger role going forward. The relationship between U.S. and China was adjusting. Both sides are adjusting. And it will be a new normal is going to emerge where national security becomes much more of an issue than ever. So, whereas before we all thought that by engaging China, it could be more different, could be more even democratic. That's a policy back then out of D.C. It was a new era. It was already forming. We're not politicians. We are venture capitalists. We're trying to do right by the money we're given to manage for the benefits of our LPs. So our job is to figure out in a new normal how we should evolve. And we start to focus a lot more outside of China in other emerging markets, as well as in the U.S. We open up our office in New York. We also start investing in Israel, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, in India, a lot more. Our investments in China as a percentage came down just by being in other markets more. And eventually that led to our partnership separating into two that we announced in September last year and formalized the separation at the end of March this year in 2024. And, I still wish my ex-colleagues in Asia well. We stay in touch as we co-manage our historical funds. But all the data in the back end are separate. We very consciously only share necessary information to report to our LPs. And we are, in the US, we're rebranded as Notable. In Asia, our ex-colleagues are rebranded as Granite Asia. So none of us use the GDV brand anymore. And we both start our new lives while still co-managing the historical funds together, but as two separate firms.
It feels like this change is global, but also national to both and domestic to both U.S. and China, because I read about how Jack Ma, he, is no longer as in favor as he is with the Chinese government, and how even Alibaba, as critical a company it was in China, has its own kind of government relations that it has to deal with. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
It is a different world. It is what it is. I'm not going to comment much on that, but we do see a lot of Chinese founders come to U.S. now, many of them with green cards, many of them applying for U.S. citizenship. Some end up going to Singapore. Many of the Chinese companies are expanding into Latin America in particular. Southeast Asia is a smaller market, but they are in there already through tie-up with local startups, and they are expanding into Latin America more and more on their own. DD acquired 99 in Brazil, but expanded in the rest of Latin America, especially the Spanish-speaking Latin, on their own as DD. So Alibaba made investments in Stone and others. Tencent made investments in Nubank and others as well. So you're seeing more Chinese companies looking at selected overseas market. India obviously is very tough for any Chinese startup, but India has a very vibrant ecosystem of their own, and we're investor in 5 companies in India ourselves. And I think my former colleagues in Asia, Granite Asia, will probably do more in India. We'll look at companies from India that's expanding into the U.S., where U.S. is the primary market too. So we regard ourselves Notable as a U.S. plus fund. U.S. is number one IT and consumer market in the world. It is one with the healthiest ecosystem. It's the one with the most amount of innovation. We're going to continue to foster that. And we're U.S. plus. The plus comes in from investing in companies, for example, in cybersecurity or data observability out of Israel. 2 of our GPs are of Jewish descent, and one of them is from Israel originally. So we understand and respect the ecosystem, innovation ecosystem out of Israel. I continue to look at our portfolio in LATAM, but we'll only add more when there are more exits out of that market. But U.S. is our primary market for sure. I lead our practice in fintech and commerce. So in fintech, we see a lot of companies that's doing embedded fintech, embedded service, providing solution to the office of a CFO. Also companies that are providing tools and SaaS solutions to enable cross-border transactions happen with a lot more safety, compliance. Overall, it's just seeing a lot of things happening as more and more transactions, whether it's B2C, now B2B, increasingly take place online. So now you have real-time access to these data, these transaction data. Therefore, you can make FinServ decisions, financial service decisions with superior fintech, leveraging AL and ML to make better decisions. And also you can see more and more system solution happening to make payment smoother, faster, leveraging the availability of API and that connectivity, just provide more support, more help, more automation. There's going to be a lot more workflow automation that we're seeing happening with the rise of AI that's impacting financial services business as well. So we're really, what gets us excited is that forget about the geopolitics. We are at a sort of cusp of the next generation of innovation coming. Remind us a lot of 96, 97 with the internet in the first era, and also with mobile internet in 2009, 2010. So a lot of stuff happening, and you see founders coming from everywhere, not just China, but worldwide, coming to America to build global businesses. We have companies in infrastructure space that founders come from Argentina, come from Eastern Europe, again, come from Israel or from different parts of Asia. We have several companies, more than 10 companies, where the founders have roots from India, but grew up in the US or have immigrated to the US for college, for graduate school, and building amazing companies. So seeing so much talent globally come to the US to build global businesses, extremely exciting. So, well, you asked me a question about geopolitics. To us, is the last chapter. The new chapter is building global businesses from here, and there's plenty of market to go after. That's still very exciting and very new, because AI automation and workflow is really, really just at the beginning, like bottom half of first inning, if you will.
I would love to ask you about U.S. venture specifically, and what we've seen over the last few years in terms of this Cambrian explosion of new funds, new firms. At the same time, this trend of larger funds getting larger and larger and moving into being RIAs and doing secondaries and continuation funds, in some cases even doing buyout. How do you see the market evolving from here, given all that's happened the last few years, especially with an eye towards, who are the firms that are going to survive, who are the firms that are not?
Yeah. I mean, venture capital is not an easy business, even though I have the sort of ranking and the profiling and so forth. It is not an easy business. You need to find at least one home run in every fund you're in, hopefully more than one, to carry the fund. You're going to have a lot of losses. The more bets you make, your loss ratio increases. I can see certain firms emerging to become bigger and become more of an asset manager. And we look at how the LP allocate assets. Alternative investments in private equity, which includes venture capital, is somewhere between 15 to 25%. And in that bucket, the bulk of it, I would say 2/3 to 3/4, go into private equity to buyouts. And those are much lower risk, and return may be more capped, 2-3x, but you can still occasionally find investment that can do 5, 6, 7x. Rare, but possible. And then the remaining 25% of the private equity bucket, the alternative investment bucket, go to venture capital. And in venture capital, you separate into two buckets. Some are in the core holdings, and some are in emerging managers. And so for LP with somewhere in the billions of AUM, the money they put into alternative investments somewhere between $1 billion to $10 billion. And out of that billion, like I said, 75% or so, 750 million going to private equity, and then 250 going to venture capital. So what they're looking for in venture capital is really alpha. Can you generate the home runs that they cannot get from anywhere else? If they want to put money to work, more in a safer way, they end up doing more in sort of buyouts and so forth. So for some of the venture capital firms that become bigger, have emerged to show that they can capture home run no matter what fund what cycle they're in. And they're also going to do investments. Many of them will end up having some investments that have more of a buyout kind of characteristic as well. It's just inevitable to kind of move it that way. And they hope that the home run they capture, they have enough ownership in it and put enough money to work to be able to generate alpha for LPs. I see other funds like yourself and others who are going to be more verticalized or are going to be focused on area they're really, really good at and really, really know. And then funds like ourselves probably will stay nimble and always have funds that are less than $1 billion in AUM. And so LP know that if we are in our funds is big enough to capture alpha, but it's small enough to still generate a return when we find a 1 or 2 home run in our fund. So you see 3 different buckets of funds emerging for sure. And then within the emerging manager section, there will be either ones who were very stage focused or the ones going to be very sector focused, what you guys call more verticalization of emerging managers. So I think all 3 buckets can do well, and LP just going to allocate their venture capital dollars accordingly among these 3 buckets, with some of the bigger fund ends up taking some of the private equity buyout dollars as well.
So every emerging manager, like Neil and myself, we're looking for that home run, that unicorn. You've invested in several unicorns across different regions globally. How have you been able to identify, what's the secret to identifying the billion-dollar potential companies?
I always feel that to be a great VC, especially a global VC, one cannot just be an economist or just be a asset manager. There's an element of being a sociologist. For something to become massive, that society can offer enough a TAM on a global basis to allow that kind of giant to emerge. When I look at some of the investments I've made, whether it's Airbnb, the investments that we have made in the past, like Square, or my investment in a firm, or different parts of Asia, each one of them had a chance to build something where there's enough TAM in the market that can be created by the solution they made or the wave they're riding to build a much bigger outcome. So I remember meeting Airbnb and talking to Brian Chesky. When you talk about experiences, when you talk about globalization, you can see how what was doing back in 2013, 2014 is going to be much bigger as an alternative to hotel. Even during COVID, I remember going on to the podcast with the information in April 2020, and it was pretty scary because the travel market was hammered. It was just bleeding. All the cancellations and people staying at home. Many people were talking about this to be the death of travel industry and definitely Airbnb. And I got onto the podcast and I mentioned it is possible that after 2 months of this, American consumers in particular need to go somewhere. Can't get cooped up in a home for 2 months and not go anywhere. So some kind of staycation will happen, and whoever can shift the inventory, shift their supply of place to stay to not from a Paris, a Venice, a London to anywhere in the U.S. Where people can drive 100 miles or 200 miles to get to, could be very interesting. And Airbnb end up having a riff, but it spend a lot of time and effort to help their engineers and employees find job elsewhere, and then really add supply from Heartland America, and it's that resilience that helped Airbnb to survive and then thrive and eventually IPO'd. So great founders come from everywhere. And Airbnb with 2 co-founders come from our design school, RISD, and can build a business that ends up impacting so many cities around the world and survive some of the toughest things that anyone has seen to their industry through COVID. Those are the things that, if you're a sociologist, you can see how consumers' behavior could change at different points in time. You map out, and that gives Silverlake a lot of credit for doing a convertible note with Airbnb at that point in time. Those are kind of things that makes our job much more interesting than ever.
Is it a similar lens that you use in terms of the sociologist lens to think about a company like Coinbase? That's another one that seems like it was very non-obvious early on. So what's the story there?
With Coinbase, we wrote a small check. Crypto was highly controversial at that time, back in 2016, and we joined the IVP round where they led at about $1 billion valuation. Crypto was emerging as a class that you can see, especially younger consumers will want to invest as a way just to build their wealth and make a name for themselves. It's the same reason why I led our investment in StockX a year later as well. So you see that younger consumers want to find ways to create wealth, and it offers a diversification from the currencies that's fiat. And so it's early. We didn't do a lot of crypto investments thereafter, but at that particular moment in time, we just felt that was the best place for people to want to invest and buy Bitcoin and Ethereum later. So they are things that emerges because of a young consumer that come out every 5-10 years. Behavior shifts. When we invest in Poshmark, it was the same thing. People not just going to buy clothes, secondary clothes, used clothes, also have a chance to be around for sustainability of this planet. Their young consumers care about that more and more. And for clothes, you don't really need to own it. There's some clothes you can just rent it instead, or buy used goods. You don't have to buy fresh. And so the consumer behavior evolve, and as they evolve, there'll be new opportunities emerging, and that's why we spend the time looking for the best teams that can take advantage of that trend.
There are certain industries and sectors and trends that fall in favor and fall not in favor. And one of them that's really not in favor right now is consumer. And it feels like to be a great consumer investor, you have to be a great sociologist. You talked about Coinbase, Airbnb, Poshmark. I'm curious, what do you think about, what are the industries or verticals that you think are unsexy now that actually will be really interesting in a few years from now that more investors should actually be spending time on?
Yeah. I mean, we're an investor in Quince, and you see how Quince has grown. When you can buy a cashmere sweater for $50, and the quality is every bit as good that you pay $400 or more offline. The value proposition is just extremely, extremely impressive. You see manufacturing moving out of China to India, to Southeast Asia, and then to Latin America, and some come back to the U.S. for sure. As these global supply chains start to move, the ones that move the fastest can work with the emerging manufacturing capability elsewhere, have a distinct edge. And Quince is started by a couple with family roots from India, and went to the top schools here in the U.S. and just very thoughtful, understand retail extremely well. This is their second startup. They already learned what they need to learn the first 10 years doing offline retail, and then apply that to internet. It's just really, really thoughtful and understand their users, consumers' behavior extremely well. Their tagline internally is, champagne taste with on beer budget. And so, which aspiring middle-class family in the U.S. and eventually elsewhere wouldn't want that? And so, even though consumer investing is out of favor, we see pockets of companies and founders who can do amazing things. And we're very bullish on Quince. We're also investor in a company called Gorgie out of Miami. It's a women energy drink company. They're probably the fastest growing women energy drink, along with Alani by Kim Kardashian. And you just see the founders, as a founder we backed for a second time. First time was doing a athlete leisure play called Lively, and she sold that business for over $100 million. And now doing the second startup is looking really strong. Doing women energy drink is for women, by women, and it's healthy. It doesn't have any additives that are bad for you. That kind of clean, healthy way of living is just a great inspiration for a lot of young consumers. So things like that, when you have an amazing founder who's extremely articulate, very thoughtful, stand for the right values, have a chance to find that product market fit, or the founder product fit, or the founder market fit. Each one is very unique and interesting. So finding that fit is the hardest thing. I think the best founders are the ones who understand the ICP, their ideal customer, extremely, extremely, extremely well. And as a result, they know how to build for themselves, build for that audience. And our audience, if it happens to be big enough and global enough, you have a chance to build a massive business.
Tim and I talk a lot about AI, as does everyone, in terms of different companies that are out there, what companies are doing, the latest and greatest products. We also sometimes talk about conversations around what are firms doing, how are venture capitalists using AI. How do you see that at Notable? Are you integrating this into part of your decision-making process or sourcing? And where do you see it having an impact on the industry or your firm over the next few years?
Yeah, we look at AI sort of in the sort of a three-tier approach. The bottom layer is the foundation layer, is where you have LLMs. You can even argue below that there's a hardware layer where the chips come in. And one of the best AI investment I ever made is probably buying NVIDIA stock 2 years ago. And so,
good one.
yeah, probably should have bought even earlier when they were doing well in gaming, especially gaming beginning of COVID. But better late than never. The middle layer is the tooling layer. And you start even seeing the LLMs expanding towards the middle layer by doing a lot more hosting and servicing of those data, preparation of data than ever before. And then the middle layer is the tool layer that's trying to make it easier for you to switch, for example, switch from model to model. Vercel is really good at doing that and provide people with that efficiency in a way that's not possible before. Third layer is the application layer. And now the application layer is just, you can see a lot more agents. So people call it agentic AI now. And the agents could be like apps in the mobile internet era. So people will build a lot more agents or a series of agents that can automate work functions. And it takes a different kind of workers to be able to, employees to be able to do this well. And you're going to see a lot more collaboration with people do the hosting, will do the design, and then people do the application and then applying that for the work purposes. And be able to manage those models for what applications for that use. And so it is, like I said, it's the bottom of the first inning, and it's extremely exciting to see how this will evolve. And there are discussions about we're reaching a certain plateau with the LLMs, but it's just going to be time before another breakthrough method come to push the frontier even more. And so it just the possibility over the next 10 years is exciting. For us specifically, we have engineers on our team, architects on our team that leverage LLM to build codes, write codes, modify codes at a much faster pace than before. We're thinking about how to leverage that for deal sourcing. We're taking data from selected sources, many more of them than before, to figure out ways to track companies. And we can see how there are ways to automate some of the functions. But a lot of automation requires more reasoning. And so I think AI needs to get smarter before they can do more within the VC sectors in particular, because a lot of it is based on judgment. A lot of it is based on reasoning of what to do. And so in that respect, probably it takes a few more years before AI can make a bigger impact within the VC sector. Having said that, again, code generation and help us to build codes, modify codes much faster than before, definitely is where we see improvements and impact already.
Last question before we do some really rapid fire questions to finish the podcast. What advice do you have for emerging managers and broadly or just in general?
Yeah, I mean, I was a emerging manager 20 years ago. It takes a lot to break through. And you and I talk about flying red eye. I still fly red eye every time I go to New York. And I'm one of the lucky ones that can sleep pretty well on the plane. And I get on the plane, I fall asleep. By the time I wake up, when the plane has landed, and I can just go out and start my day there. So working hard and working smart are both necessary, but not necessarily sufficient. Having developed that intuition, that sense of what's coming around the corner, and be able to take lessons from one industry, one discipline, or one geography to the other, and do that well is not easy, but I can see more and more younger VCs developing a knack for that, and be able to figure out, just like founders need to figure out which product, which market gives himself a perfect fit or the best fit. VCs also need to figure out which trends they should tackle to become what's most relevant for themselves that can do well in it. So it's impossible to be a generalist these days, in my opinion. Everyone has to sort of pick an area to hunt and find what makes sense for them and understand it better than other people do, and be able to work with the best teams to do that. Having said that, one thing, my advice for emerging managers is that getting to deals is the easier part. Scaling the business is the harder part. Figure out when to exit is the hardest part, because no matter whether we like it in a minute or not, the macro, where interest rate lies, has a huge impact on the state of the market. A lot of excitement happens or valuation jumps a lot in a lower interest rate environment. And when macro changes, it has impact on your exit value as well. So know when to sell, how to sell. Even if you do it programmatically, one of the things we did is looking at backward data over the last 20 plus years of exits, and realized that with a few exceptions, there definitely are outliers. Someone like a Alibaba, someone like a Square, they're definitely outliers. For the most part, for the most exits, had we just exit programmatically over a 6, 12, 18-month period post-IPO lockup, probably can capture 75% of the value of the exit at peak time. And so instead of trying to time the market, just exit programmatically gets you with a very good outcome in most cases. Now, you should exit over a 6-month period, 12-month period, 18-month period post-lockup. That's also a judgment call that you're not sure. And is the company you have now in Alibaba or a Square or someone else? It also takes time and effort to figure out who's who. So even then, there's still a lot of room for judgment. This is why AI may not be as useful in terms of doing that. You'll take more data points to do that. But I always think that getting into a deal is hard, but scaling is harder, and how to exit is the hardest.
Fascinating. And then in certain cases, you really want to buy and hold like NVIDIA. That would have been incredible to have.
Well, NVIDIA, the first 10 years did not look like NVIDIA. But NVIDIA in the second decade looks very different. And NVIDIA in the third decade maybe is best decade. So a lot of times you just don't know, right? And the company started in 94, 95, 96 timeframe. And nobody paid attention and almost died. So a lot of companies don't look like NVIDIA until it's much bigger. And even then, if they catch the right wave, and you got to get just credit, incredibly focus on the present, but always keep an eye out on the future, and always do the hardest thing the problem that nobody wants to solve, but if you solve it well for the most advanced users, it has very interesting application elsewhere. And when I look at TSMC, always do the hardest problem and figuring out how to manufacture in the hardest way. Even you see that the Arizona fab, for example, doing much better now, and people celebrate it. But really, that the difference happened because TSMC sent tons and tons of Taiwanese engineers from Hsinchu Science Park to Arizona and staying in Arizona to make sure things work. That kind of hard-working work ethic is not talked about as much in the press, but to me, that immigrant mentality, no matter where you're from, whether it's Taiwan or India or Israel or Middle East or Eastern Europe, Latin America, or wherever it is, that work ethic, that drive, that passion, applying intelligence to a problem that you understand, can relate to the most, you can do that extremely well. Even if we don't win the first decade, you can win the second decade. If not the second decade, but third decade. If anybody look at their career coming out of school, 20 years old, looking at the 3-decade thing, you keep on doing the right thing and make decisions based on the right values. Always trying to make the pie bigger. Always figure out a win-win. Always look for partners that you can collaborate with. Always try to help others to make them more money, because they make money, you'll make money. If you have the same consistent method and do that, we wouldn't do that over a 30-year period. It's very difficult to not succeed.
Amazing. And it seems like that's what you've been doing, Hans. So we have incredible admiration for what you've done. Some rapid fire questions to close us out. What's a favorite place to travel for you?
Ooh, that's a hard one. Probably it's a toss-up between Rome and Kyoto.
Nice. How about favorite music or band or song?
It's going to sound very, I like the Four Seasons by Vivaldi. Is probably my favorite.
Classic.
And I would say Coldplay is also up there.
Nice. Favorite movie or movies?
Shawshank Redemption.
Nice. Favorite books?
Malcolm Gladwell's books. I love them. Always make me think differently.
Last one. Favorite snack or candy?
Oh, that was tough. I love. There are too many to mention, but any Japanese snacks that's popular has worked well for me.
Hans, Neil, and I really enjoyed this conversation. So much gems for emerging managers and gems on how venture capital is changing. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you for having me. It has been a pleasure.
Thanks, Hans.
Yeah.